welcome to the Seed Hill section of the Anchor Mill Heritage Trail, which is to be found right next to the Abbey. There have been mills in this area for many centuries, but the story of the Anchor Mill begins with John Clarke. He was a member of the mill-owning Clarke family who did so much for the Paisley thread manufacturing industry. The Clarke's main competitors were J&P Coats, another local family concern. In the late 1880s, the two firms began to cooperate, finally merging in 1896. This brought the Anchor Mills and Coats Fergusley operations under one umbrella using the Coats brand. A substantial overseas expansion followed, and by 1913 Coats was Britain's largest textile company, employing 40,000 workers worldwide, 12,000 of them in Scotland. Production finally ended here in 1993. This fine piece of Victorian industrial architecture was built in 1898. It was designed by W. J. Morley of Bradford, who were leading architects of mills at that time. The machinery was entirely steam-driven, and the mill had its own boiler and engine houses, most of which have gone. The octagonal chimney stack, which is not isolated as it is now, is over 200 feet tall. The chimney is the only one from both sites to escape demolition. A more modern extension was added later using a lot of 1930s style glass bricks to allow in the light. The mill takes its name from the former Clarke's Mile End Mill in the East End of Glasgow, not because, as is often thought, it's being exactly a mile away from Paisley Cross. The production and staff were moved here when the Glasgow mill closed. The six-storey mill still has high-quality maple flooring, high ceilings and large windows that allow natural light to flood into the building. The glorious toilets retain the period vitriolite tiled WCs, formerly used by the mill lassies, and are where many of them got up to mischief.
You used to get your ears pierced. That was another thing that happened to me. I've got these funny stories I tell everybody. I went into the toilet and here's this girl and she turned round and just then she had this bar of soap and she did like that and the blood went shh and it hurt me, so I started screaming. So the next thing was two men come in and took an arm each of me and run me down the stairs, and the lassie's got the blood, she's got her finger in her neck and she's running at the back. So when I got to the first aid, they slapped my face and they said, where are you? I said, it's no me, it's her. So she's running at the side with her finger in the jugular and I was covered in blood. So we thought that was funny. No, at the time we didn't, but we thought that was funny later on. And then I got my hair cut in the toilet, because you used to get lasses that would cut your hair while you're sitting. And when's your tea break? All right, I'll come, and you walk in to the toilet and come back out. And the boss would go like that, and as if, because this side would all be cut and the other side wasn't it? And you had to wait till you were going back in again, because you had to ask permission to go to the toilet, so you had to put your hand up. It was funny, things like that happening. And they used to dress you up in all this gear with paper flowers and streamers, and you had a potty with salt in it and a wee baby, plastic baby in it. And what they did is they ran about in the dunes, hand up, and the rattle tins and everything. And then you had to jump over the potty with the salt in it. Good luck. That was so that you were a child was in the potty. The salt was for good luck, because you never ever gave salt away. That's a kind of thing with Paisley.
The refurbished building now houses a large number of offices, a childcare nursery and a gym. There is a cafe on the ground floor which is open to the public, and free entry exhibitions are often displayed in the reception area. The mill also hosts the Thread Mill Museum, which is run by an enthusiastic team of volunteers and contains a large collection of images and artefacts. This single-storey lodge controlled the eastern entrance to the Anchor Mill's site. It was built at the same time as the Mile End Mill and was used by Coats staff for deliveries. Refurbished since the last mill closed in the 1990s, it now houses offices. This is all that remains of the first aid station that was built in the 1920s. Medical staff were stationed in the heart of the complex in order to provide a rapid response to emergencies 24 hours a day. Locals say that the nurses were part of a voluntary organisation, the Voluntary Aid Detachment, which provided field nursing services mainly during the two world wars. Any workers suffering from minor ailments would be taken to the first aid station. which also housed a dentist's office and provided medical checkups to staff. Prior to the introduction of improved health and safety measures, on-site medical staff were needed to care for workers suffering from burns, from slippages on greasy or wet floors, or from more serious industrial injuries. The gassing mill was built in 1923 and has since been renamed the Sir James Clarke Building. This Art Deco, two-storey flat-roofed building is the youngest surviving building on the site. Coates cotton threads were produced here in the three main finishes: soft, glassy and mercerised. The mercerising process subjected rough threads to a treatment that brought out the lustre of the cotton and also increased its strength. Two basic operations were involved in this: gassing and the mercerising process. In gassing or singeing, the thread was passed through a gas jet or over an electric burner, and the tiny hairs on the surface were singed off to leave a smooth finish.
The thread had to pass through the peak of the blue flame at a fixed temperature and speed, and this singed the cotton. Because of it passed over rollers and that into a package, this took off the soot as it was. And anybody who worked in a gassing mill for any time was known as a black gang, because you actually sweated very much in there because of the temperature, but as the sweat rolled down to your waist, the soot went as well. And when you went home at night and stripped off, you had a black band round your waist, so we were known as the black gang.
The third floor of the mill was used for the singeing and lubrication of the new Dreamer thread. This thread was officially launched in 1977, the year of the Royal Silver Jubilee, and all Coates staff received a commemorative spool of thread in red, white and blue. Latterly, the building was used as a packing department and a transit warehouse. Until the early 1970s, the huge Atlantic and Pacific mills stood on the area now occupied by this supermarket. They were connected to the gassing mill by an overhead walkway. Built in 1872, the Atlantic mill contained 71,000 thread-producing spindles. The Pacific mill was completed in 1875 and had 80,000 spindles. A central tower that linked the two was added in 1886. Combined, it was the largest manufacturing unit on the anchor site, employing more than 3,000 people between them. Each corner tower of the Atlantic Mill featured a stone plaque inscribed Anchor Thread Works. These plaques were each surrounded by ornate carved floral garlands and could be seen from across Paisley. This is the only survivor. It now lies in the corner of the Mile End Mills car park, in need of a major restoration. When the Titanic sunk in 1912, the workers of both mills paid for a commemorative plaque at the Atlantic Mill. It didn't survive the demolition. The Pacific Mill was the first to close when production was transferred to the Fergusley site, and its sister followed in the 1950s. Both mills were eventually demolished between 1972 and 73. Paisley was once famous for its weaving industry. For nearly 100 years until the 1870s, Paisley pattern shawls were highly fashionable. The invention of the Jacquard Loom in the 1820s transformed production from a cottage industry to an industrial process. As a result, many of the weavers lost their livelihoods and left Scotland for Canada or Australia. The Embroidery Mill was established in the early 1840s, during that period of upheaval. It was originally a shawl factory, but the mill later produced embroidery threads. This is the oldest surviving building here, and it is the only building to have been in continual use since it was built.
The middle flat was colour cards. A colour card was a 4 or a 5-fold carton, and each page had a cardboard slot which was notched, and you had a band of thread wound round that. It was put into a machine, and the girls had to put down the correct thread at the correct notch and wind so much onto each of these strips. They were then put into a sandwich between the cardboard and a window card, and printed on the window would be the number of that thread, so that you could open up a colour card, take the thread that you want, match it up with what you wanted, and that gave you the colour and the number, and you can order it up.
Today, the Embroidery Mill contains offices for local businesses and voluntary organisations, including the Paisley People's Archive. Built in 1880, the Anchor building is actually a row of terraced houses built for the mill's part-time firemen and their families. The firemen were mill employees who lived here on condition that they be permanently on call. Each house had a bell system which could be operated by the fire master in the fire station. The Anchor building later housed mill workers and overseers and now contains 20 flats. Built in 1909, the West Gatehouse stands at the western entrance to the Anchor site nearest the town centre. It is apparently the last surviving gatehouse that had a hydraulically controlled gate. Water was pumped into a tank in the roof and then passed downward through a mechanical system that opened the gate. During royal visits, the gatehouse would be festooned with ribbons and banners. The building was sold in 1984 and was bought by an absentee landlord who allowed it to decay. After a compulsory purchase order from Renfrewshire Council, it was sold on to Mr. Marcus Dean, the current owner of the Abbey Mill Business Centre. Originally called the Spooling Mill, this building was built in 1886 by the same practice that built the Mile End Mill and was the largest mill on the complex. Built of red brick with a sandstone balustrade, the building is 85 feet high and the towers are 100 feet tall. The mill was one of the earliest buildings in Paisley to be lit with electricity and also one of the first to have a water sprinkler system installed. Inside, the mill has an atrium between the first floor and the fifth, which enabled belts driven by the mill engine on the ground floor to power machinery on any level further up. Latterly, the mill was used for the finishing of domestic sewing thread and for handicrafts. After a reorganisation in the 1970s, Coates spent around £60,000 on new machinery for winding tapestry wool, and this kept production going for a few more years. Manufacturing ended here in the early 1980s, and the building was sold in 1984. It lay empty and neglected for 20 years before being saved by a £12 million regeneration project. It now contains businesses and private apartments. On the wall of the North Tower, there was a plaque marking the birthplace of Alexander Wilson, the Paisley poet and American ornithologist. The house stood nearby, but it's long gone. Wilson emigrated to the United States when he was 15, and the newer memorial is to be found just downstream of the Hamels. His statue stands by the town hall. Sometimes known locally as Little Niagara Falls or Seedhill Craigs, the Hamels form a natural weir which is created by a ledge of volcanic rock crossing the White Cart. Various forms of industrial activity have taken place here since the 6th century. By the 19th century, the Hamels was home to grain mills, tanneries and textile industries. The Watermill Hotel, formerly the Saucil Flour Mills, backs onto the Hamels on the south bank of the river. This was always a popular fishing spot for local youth. One man, a local tanner named John Harron, was reputed to have saved the lives of at least 31 boys by jumping into the waters, wearing everything but his clogs. In 1855, the people of Paisley rewarded Harron's bravery with 50 sovereigns and a silver pocket watch. The counting house was where the pay packets were made up. It stood around here. From 1974, the counting house was an administration building used by the mill manager and his superintendents. In the 1940s and 50s, it had a model Spanish galleon on display that was made by anchor apprentices from silver bobbins and thread. The ship was sent to the London offices some time ago. The caustic building once stood in this area. It was a wooden and glass shed that was weakened by the caustic soda that was stored there in sacks. After demolition in the 1950s, it was discovered that the chemical had seeped into the foundations. In front of the domestic finishing mill was a series of buildings that was used to make packaging materials and to store bales and colour stocks. Crates and boxes were manufactured in the on-site sheds, with blank card arriving at the mills to be printed, cut and shaped into flat pack boxes. This whole area previously contained a variety of buildings used to service and carry out the production, finishing and dyeing processes. The West Colour Dye Works was here, behind it the thread stores. The East Colour Dye Works operated here in the early 1960s. Beyond where the newer houses now stand was the site of the spinning shed, the South Bale store and the filter house. Beside those buildings stood the mercerising building. This was where the thread was passed through various tanks of caustic soda solution, causing the fibres to swell, making it more robust and giving it an improved lustered finish. Mercerised thread was the strongest that could be made at that time. The old Linn mill was also near here. It was originally built around 1859 but burnt down in December 1879 with the loss of one life, a foreman. Rebuilt soon afterwards, the Linn became a B-listed building before it was once again gutted by a fire in 1993. After being placed on the Buildings at Risk register, it was eventually demolished. The Anchor Fire Station was an important part of the Seed Hill complex. The original Seed Hill mills were entirely destroyed by fire on the 18th of October 1799. Many other fires occurred in or near various Paisley mills over the following years. Station staff would also support other Paisley firefighters out with this site. In 1912, fireman Charles Houston died while assisting the Butter Brigade. Right here, in 1880, a bridge was built to connect the complex with Paisley's Saussel district, this side of the White Cart. During the years following World War II, it fell into disrepair and remained unused for decades. Today, it is to be found a few hundred feet upstream. In 2006, the bridge was removed, restored and relocated at a cost of £560,000 as part of a major regeneration project. Working conditions at the mills were hard during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Towards the end of the Victorian era, Coates began to provide leisure facilities for their employees. The Anchor Bowling Green and Pavilion was built in 1896. It's still in use, but is slightly smaller than it once was. Some of it has been swallowed by the Mile End Mills car park. A similar bowling club was established at the Fergusley Mills complex, and the workers organised inter-mill competitions. At one time, a road and a bridge connected this end of the complex to the recreation ground and the bleach works on the other side of the river. Another housing estate now stands on the White Cart's southern bank. The club opened in 1923 with a sports event to mark the occasion. The mill workers organised cricket, football and hockey teams and held athletic contests. Best attended were the events where Anchor workers competed against teams from the Fergusley Mills. Regular dances were held in the clubhouse, including a ticket-only dance on Saturday nights. The bleach works stood to the east of the recreation ground, was built at about the same time as the gassing mill and was demolished in the mid-1980s. The bridge that carries the Paisley Canal line over the White Cart is the oldest bridge in the world still to be used for railways. It originally carried the canal and was built by Thomas Telford. One of the stranger enterprises to have been undertaken by Coates took place here in the mid-1970s. Mill processes mostly involved considerable amounts of water, which was often heated. In 1976, when the company was looking into diversification strategies, they came up with the idea of farming eels. 2 years later, Paisley's first, and probably last eel farm was established behind the Mile End Mill. The venture targeted the Dutch market where eels are a delicacy. Various difficulties, including the smell, ensured that the project was soon abandoned. The Anchor Mills employed many thousands of local people over the years, roughly 5,000 people at its peak in the mid-20th century. From here, we head west, where the Heritage Trail continues at Fergusley.